Not to bring up bad memories, but remember the absolute dumpster fire that was the cultural response to the 2016 Ghostbusters movie? I figured enough time has passed that we should be able to have a civil conversation about it. One of the more famous, or infamous, contributions to that whole discourse was a video by James Rolfe, aka the Angry Video Game Nerd. And there's a particular part of that video that's really stuck with me all these years later.
The real problem I have with it is the title. Calling it Ghostbusters, but without having any connection to the original story or characters, is a shameless attempt to bank on the name to get fans to see it based on the title alone. It's piggybacking on the name. That's why we need a new term, and I call it a name make. It's a name make.
That concept, and especially that term, is something that I've thought about a lot since then. Except I totally misremembered the line and thought it was Nameboot, which I didn't realize until I sat down to write the script. But I like the word Nameboot better, so that's the term I'll be using for the rest of the video. So, what's a Nameboot? Name make and Nameboot are derived from the terms remake and reboot, all of which refer to new iterations of a franchise or IP. A Nameboot, however, is when a new iteration uses the same name and branding as the rest of the franchise, but has virtually nothing else in common with the original. Like Ghostbusters 2016. It was called Ghostbusters, and it looked like Ghostbusters, but it had no connection to the story or characters of the original Ghostbusters. The only things they have in common are the basic premise and the name, hence Nameboot. This kind of thing has popped up a lot in recent years. Lots of weird sequels and spin-offs that have nothing to do with what came before. Why does Hollywood keep doing this? Well, it should be pretty obvious. Money. It makes more financial sense to stick the name of a popular IP onto a new concept than it does to make the same concept as an original story. That's not the part I'm interested in. What I am curious about is what this does to a Nameboot's story. How does this affect the creative process? What do the creative teams do to handle this weird hand they've been dealt? And is it possible for a Nameboot to be good? Okay, I've got a whole list of movies and TV shows that are nothing like their source material. But before we dig into those, I want to hammer down this definition a little bit. What counts as a Nameboot? If a Nameboot is defined as a franchise installment that has nothing in common with the rest of the franchise, what counts as nothing in common? Let me first list off a few stories that aren't Nameboots. The Percy Jackson movies, for example. Those movies are terrible, and they're inaccurate adaptations of the books. But they're still recognizably Percy Jackson. They still use the same premise, plot, and characters. A Nameboot has to be something truly unrecognizable. Also, there are a lot of movies that are very loosely based on books. Like, I don't know, Shrek? But those aren't Nameboots either, because the whole point of a Nameboot is to use the name recognition as a marketing ploy. I bet a ton of people watching didn't even know Shrek was based on a book. And something like the later Fast and Furious movies aren't Nameboots. Even though the 9th movie is way different from the first movie, there's a clear progression there. A continuing story with the same characters, themes, and the basic premise of cargo fast. Finally, it's worth noting that some franchises are a lot more flexible than others. They allow the writers of new versions to do a lot more new and unique things while still maintaining some semblance of cohesion. On one end of the spectrum, you have the average slasher movie. There's a reason why there have been so many Friday the 13th movies. All you need for one of these is Jason and some people for Jason to kill. As long as you have that, you can do it as many times as you want, in as many different ways as you want. You can even send Jason to space and nobody will complain as long as he's killing people. Way on the other end of that spectrum is Back to the Future. The thing about Back to the Future is that it's not an especially original concept. It's about time travel that's been done thousands of times in thousands of different ways. What makes Back to the Future good is 100% in the execution. The aesthetic, the performances, the tone, plus a lot of cultural influence specific to the time it was made, the 1980s. Most of which isn't stuff that you can just recreate on a whim. If you're going to try to make a new Back to the Future today, you can't just throw in a time-traveling DeLorean and call it a day. You better also have a Doc Brown who's a kooky high-energy scientist, a wide-eyed and naive Marty McFly who stumbles his way through everything, a fast-paced and fun tone, an aesthetic that feels like it was ripped straight out of the 80s, and 100 other little things that give it that indescribable Back to the Future feel. And even if you have all that, there's still a very high chance people will look at it and think, that's just some time travel movie with Back to the Future's name stuck on it. Somewhere in the middle, you have something like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. There have been lots of different incarnations over the years, and some of them are really out there. But all of them have 4 turtles, each with a specific name, colored headband, and core personality trait, who are trained by Splinter, fight the Shredder, and have a human friend named April. As soon as one of those elements is missing, it's no longer Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But beyond that, you can do whatever you want with the side characters, art style, tone, etc. So there's not a hard and fast rule to what a new installment needs to keep in and what they can leave out. It's all on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it's not even about concrete details. Sometimes it's just the vibe. Like, I always thought it was so weird that in the Garfield comic strip, Garfield's whole thing is that he eats and sleeps and lays around doing nothing. But then there are all these animated movies and shows that have Garfield fighting monsters and saving the world and stuff. But the thing is, no matter how outlandish the plots of these things get, it's pretty clear that this is still the character of Garfield. He still likes to eat, and he still has a deadpan, exhausted reaction to everything. That's all that really matters.
I would like to go back where I was!
Okay, all that preamble has given us a clear picture of what makes a nameboot. Now it's time to look at some examples of nameboots to see what the content of these stories actually look like. Starting with the new Ghostbusters. Now I'm about to, state some opinions on Ghostbusters 2016. I really hope I'm not about to summon a whole bunch of trolls that have lain dormant for the past 6 years, but it's a chance I'm willing to take. By all accounts, this is a perfect fit for my definition of nameboot. You can easily imagine some Hollywood bigwig going, "Hey, we've got the rights to Ghostbusters. People love Ghostbusters. We should make another one of those. It'd make us so much money." I don't know why I did a 40s radio voice for that. So, Ghostbusters 2016 takes the same basic premise of the 1984 movie. A bunch of paranormal investigators start up a business where they drive ghosts out of places like exterminators. It also uses all the same aesthetics and iconography of the original movie. The proton pack, slimy green ghosts, the car, the theme song. The big difference is, we have new characters and actors in the lead roles. It may be the same general idea, but it's a different story following different people. You might be thinking, the way you described it, these two movies actually have a lot in common. It's really just the characters that are different. But there are tons of franchises with next-generation reboots that use new characters, and they work fine. And you'd be right. With most franchises, this setup would be plenty to justify its connection. But not Ghostbusters. A big thing that I always thought was missing from the whole Ghostbusters 2016 conversation was the circumstances in which the original movie got made. Back in the 80s, movies weren't nearly as IP-driven as they were today. It was more about the star power of individual actors. Ghostbusters was made by a bunch of Saturday Night Live alumni. The premise of this movie, busting ghosts, wasn't the thing anybody really cared about. The reason this movie got made was for a bunch of SNL guys, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, and Eddie Murphy before he passed on the role, to get together and do some wacky comedy. And if you look at the new Ghostbusters, it's basically the same thing. They got a bunch of current and former SNL cast members, Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones, to get together and crack some jokes, all wrapped up in the package of Ghostbusters. That's also probably a big reason why the main cast was all female. All the biggest names associated with modern SNL are women. You can have all the iconography you want from the original, but the only thing that really mattered about the original movie was the cast. If you don't have the cast, it's not Ghostbusters. The people who made this thing were in for a rude awakening when it came out. They completely misunderstood why people cared about Ghostbusters in the first place. I think the backlash was way harsher than it should have been, and it sucks that some of it came from a place of sexism, but negative reactions were inevitable. And that's not a dig at the filmmakers, it's just the reality of their circumstances. Funnily enough, it seems like the studio really took what happened to heart. Later, they released Ghostbusters Afterlife, a movie that did reunite the original cast, and did tie back to the original story, to a much more positive reception. Okay, next. Things I do for content. After avoiding it for years, I finally made myself sit down and watch the first few episodes of Riverdale. It was something. If you're not aware, Riverdale is a teen drama show on the CW that's based on Archie comics. The comics go all the way back to the 1940s, and they're lighthearted, child-friendly stories about a teen named Archie and all his friends. Riverdale is the name of the town where they all live, which is where the show gets its name. Riverdale the show takes this premise and its characters, and transforms them into a sort of grimdark soap opera full of sex, drugs, violence, and murder. Now, as a concept, I get why someone might be interested in giving Archie a grittier makeover. The comics are nowhere near as popular as they once were, and people who do know them probably think they're pretty dated and old-fashioned. But I grew up with Archie comics, I'd say I have a pretty solid idea of what makes Archie, Archie. And Riverdale is not it.
In case you haven't noticed, I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in.
The thing is, Archie is definitely on the more flexible end of that spectrum I mentioned earlier. There's a lot you can do with Archie, and a lot that has been done. Archie and his friends have been written in the future, in the past, as toddlers, as superheroes, as zombies. There's a lot you can do. There are only two things that you really need. First, that fluffier, kid-friendly vibe. And even that is negotiable. See the aforementioned zombie story. Or Archie meets Predator, and that comic was weird. And second, the thing that you absolutely need to stay consistent is the group of characters with their core personality traits. You need Archie, the lovable everyman, Betty, the kind-hearted girl next door, Veronica, the snobby but still mostly nice rich girl, Reggie, the narcissistic jerk, Jughead, who only wants to eat, and a whole list of smaller side characters. As long as the story still has recognizable versions of these characters, you can do whatever you want with them, put them in any situation. How does Riverdale handle this? Well, it really seems like they just did whatever and then stuck the character names on after the fact. Jughead is easily the worst offender. His two defining traits in the comics are that he loves food and doesn't want to date anyone. Here, he doesn't seem interested in food, and he dates Betty not too far into the season. It looks like Reggie got mostly written out of the show because his actor had to back out last minute. Betty is a straight-up sociopath. Veronica I can be more forgiving with, since her level of goodness has always fluctuated depending on what the writers need. But it's Archie that's the biggest problem. Sure, Archie is an everyman. But to be an everyman, you need to be a decent guy, so people can, root for you. This Archie is a total creep. He's brooding, he's angry, he does horrible things for selfish reasons. And he has a romantic relationship with his teacher, Miss Grundy. I know she's not the most important character, but to me, this is the clearest signal that the show has no interest in the source material. If you didn't know, this is what Grundy looks like in the comics. And think about that name. Grundy. Grundy. The reason she has that name is because Grundy is the most unattractive old lady name you can imagine. The only thing this character has in common with the original is that she's Archie's teacher and her name. It's really clear that the writers of the show just wanted to write a storyline where a high schooler hooks up with his teacher, and they only named the teacher Grundy to tie it back to the comics, even if that name undermines the whole concept from the get-go. If you change the names of all these characters, it wouldn't even occur to most people that these bear some similarity to Archie. It's so obvious that nobody making the show cares about Archie comics at all. They're just making a show about teens, and sticking the names of Archie characters on them because it'll make more people pay attention. I'm going to link to a video by Mother's Basement that does a more deep dive into all this, but for now I'm going to move on. You know what else is totally, unambiguously a name boot? Joker. This is something I've talked about before, but think about what this movie is. This is a movie about a character named the Joker, a villain who dresses like a clown. Sure. But what does this movie have in common with any other piece of Batman media? I'd argue, just the names. Joker, Gotham City, Thomas and Bruce Wayne. Oh, and I guess Arkham Asylum too. This movie's connection to Batman and the DC superhero franchise is paper thin. Of course, there's one big reason why nobody complains about this. Joker is good. It's a successful, enjoyable movie. I never said a name boot had to be bad. But think about this. In a parallel universe, this movie could have been a completely original story called, I don't know, The Clown, taking place in a real city, with the Wayne's family name changed to something else. As soon as you take those names away, its connection to Batman is gone. Joker could have easily stood on its own as a movie. But if it had, it wouldn't have made $1 billion.
You think this is funny?
Let's do one more example. A more recent one. What about Lightyear? Even though I saw a lot of hype for this movie, I also noticed a lot of people annoyed that Pixar was even making it. To make sure we're all on the same page, Buzz Lightyear is a toy from the Toy Story movies. In-universe, he's a licensed toy based on a movie. Lightyear is that movie that the toy was supposedly based on. This is a bit of a different situation from the other ones I've talked about. Buzz Lightyear isn't a franchise, not really. He's part of Toy Story. We never learned much about the actual character the toy was based on. So in terms of making a movie about the actual character of Buzz Lightyear, Pixar didn't have much to go on. All we get are little bits and pieces of lore across the Toy Story movies. So before the movie even got made, Lightyear was doomed to be a name boot. It's not based on anything. It's just a movie with a name and a face that we've seen before. What's interesting though is that the movie could have done a lot more to connect to the Buzz Lightyear mythos, but it didn't. Like, nothing about Emperor Zurg matches up with what we hear about in Toy Story.
No, Buzz. I am your father.
Buzz? Dad? Guess again.
And you could assume that all the voice lines that are a part of Toy Buzz are lines from the movie.
It's a secret mission in uncharted space. Let's go! Mission accomplished. Return to base.
But none of these lines are in Lightyear either. He does say a couple of lines that Toy Buzz says on his own though, which is interesting.
You're mocking me, aren't you?
You're mocking me, aren't you?
Again, looking at Lightyear, all you'd have to do is change the names of Buzz Lightyear and Zurg and their designs, and you'd have a totally original concept. Of course, Disney was more likely to greenlight a Lightyear movie because of IP recognition. But the whole thing about Buzz Lightyear was that he's a generic spaceman toy from a generic space movie. And that's exactly what Lightyear ended up being. A generic kid's space movie with a name that we recognize plastered on the front. So, those are Nameboots. They're all more or less money-making scams created by studio execs who only see these names as cash cows. Here's the thing though, that's not the whole story. None of these examples I used are irredeemably bad. In fact, some of them are pretty good. See, the process of making any work of film is complicated. It requires a lot of time and money. Tying a new concept to an established brand name is a proven effective method of getting it made. Sure, slapping a name on a project will make investors happy, but there are still teams of creative people working on these things, who actually care about telling a good story, ideally. Even if the initial premise was created out of a desire for big profits, a good creative team can make lemons into lemonade. Joker rose to near universal acclaim, even if it has almost nothing to do with Batman. Lightyear might not be up to Pixar's usual standards, but it's still a Pixar movie with a lot of great stuff in it. I think Ghostbusters 2016's biggest flaw wasn't that it was a Ghostbusters reboot. Its biggest flaw was that a lot of the jokes didn't land. If the movie was funnier, I bet audiences would have been way more forgiving. Even with Riverdale, the one that I was the most annoyed about, I have to acknowledge that it really seems like the cast and crew is having fun making it. They had a story they wanted to tell. A dumb, cheesy, pandering kind of story. But if they have a creative vision, and they need to stick on some recognizable names to make it a reality, who am I to judge? It can be really frustrating to see a new movie or TV show that feels like it has a tacked-on connection to another better story, especially if it's one that you really care about. But it might be worthwhile taking a second to put your anger aside and look at the story on its own terms. It might surprise you.
If there is one thing the internet agrees on, it's that you should never change anything ever. I hope you die.